You know what was a mess? Europe after World War II. Which doesn't surprise me. We were bombing them every day and bombing them every night. We have armies tromping all over the field. Some of the agriculture, they hadn't planted crops in some of these places in 4 or 5 or even 6 years because of the war. There was massive starvation. People were surviving on fewer calories per day than a Happy Meal from McDonald's. And it was a mess. But what to do about it? Well, if you're the Soviet Union, you come in there, you establish satellite countries, and you enforce a communist military style secret police type government, tight control, and you keep them weak so that they cannot threaten you. The United States does kind of the exact opposite, actually. The United States is going to come in and go, okay, so what happened at the end of World War I? All right, because you know what? Some people do learn from history, something you should remember, study and learn from your history. All right, so they're going to come in, and at the end of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles basically tried to strip Germany of all of its strength, and it didn't work. What it ends up doing is it ends up backfiring and causing a massive creation of a massive nationalism and resentment toward the Western powers. And so we don't want that to happen. We also don't want communism to spread. We don't want communism to, because communism is coming in and says, we will make sure that you're fed, we'll take away all your rights and freedoms, but you'll have food. Well, when you're surviving on 400 calories a day, you're willing to do a lot. You're willing to take a lot of stuff. And so George Marshall, comes in and says, I have a plan. And it's called the Marshall Plan today, although at the time it was called the European Recovery Act. And the European Recovery Act sets out to try to rebuild first European agriculture. Why agriculture? Well, think back to the Great Depression. What was the first thing that failed in our country? Agriculture. So what's the first thing that George Marshall is going to try to rebuild? Agriculture. And then he's going to say, and we're going to help these countries rebuild their industry. Again, the Great Depression, which we were terrified the Great Depression was going to come back. Let me tell you, that was the stuff of nightmares. That's the kind of thing that would keep Truman awake even more than how many people died with the bomb, was what if the Great Depression comes back? And so the Marshall Plan was almost as much about trying to make sure that doesn't happen. So we're going to rebuild their industry. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that by providing massive loans. All right, so we're going to infuse a lot of cash into the French, the Belgian, the English, and even the German and Italian banking financial system. All right, so that they can take these and they can provide low interest loans to the people they serve so that they can then use that money to rebuild their factories. Only instead of building airplane engines, you're going to build BMW automobiles. Or instead of building Jeeps, you're going to build VW Bugs, Volkswagen Bugs. You're going to, because before, the Nazi government was paying you to build all these things. So you've got to have some sort of industry. And so agriculture, things like this, they provide millions of dollars to go in there to do these low interest loans. And they don't really care if the money gets paid back to the Italian banks or the French banks, or the German banks or whatever, right? Although I do have to point one thing out, because this is to me kind of funny, is that all the Marshall Plan money has been spent by most European countries except one. It's 2020 when I make this video, and German banks are still using Marshall Plan money because the Germans keep paying it back. The Italians, not so much. Anyway, so, but the idea is that you're going to be able then to rebuild Europe, and we want Europe to be prosperous. We want Europe to be strong. We want Europe to be able to resist communism. We want Europe to be able to resist nationalism. We want Europe to be so prosperous and so wealthy that they don't want to go to war. Remember World War II. What's one of the causes of World War II? People are starving. So you know what? We're going to help them rebuild their agriculture so they can feed themselves. It's brilliant. And you know what? It's successful. Europe, Western Europe, standard living is still to this day, even though the Soviet Union is gone, is still far and away higher than Eastern Europe. Even Germany. Germany was split into two countries. Originally, Germany they had these four occupation zones. They had an American zone, they had a British zone, they had a French zone, and they had a Soviet zone. And then the country, or the city of Berlin, which was in the middle of the Soviet zone, was also split into four parts: English, American, French, and Soviet. And so what ends up happening is eventually the Western countries unify their three parts into the Federal Republic of Germany. But the Soviet Union chooses to keep their quarter, and they call it the German Democratic Republic, Deutsches Demokratische Republik. And so, and this is going to go on for a long time. And Berlin is going to be right in the middle of Eastern Europe, what they call Eastern Europe. And they're going to have all sorts of problems. We're going to have a Berlin airlift. We're going to have a Berlin Wall. At one point, because the West was so much more prosperous than the Soviet East, that people would leave the East to go shop in the West, in West Berlin. And so the Soviets got so tired of the East Berlin, the East Berliners, indulging in Western culture, that they built the Berlin Wall. They actually put up a wall, went up overnight, and I can't remember how many people died trying to get across that wall. But, it's an interesting thing. The great president Ronald Reagan once said that democracy is not perfect, but we've never had to build a wall to keep our citizens in. And so the Soviet Union had to build this wall. Well, in my lifetime in 1990, the wall came down. And a couple of years later, Germany, the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, disappeared. It became part of the Bundesrepublik Deutschland, the Federal Republic of Germany. And that was in 1992. Well, here it is 2020, and you can still see the difference in the quality of the median incomes, housing costs, all these things that we used to think about for economic life, between what used to be the Soviet Union, or the part of the Soviet sphere, and the Western part with its economy. And so it's really kind of an interesting case study in how economics can last for decades, even though Eastern Germany is gone. They still have, I think they still have like 4 times the unemployment rate, and a third of the educational attainment. I mean, it's really amazing, the difference there. But it was because of the Marshall Plan. It was because the United States dedicated itself to rebuilding Western Europe. It cost us billions of dollars. And I've got an assigned reading in the on this week, where you're going to be reading some of the people who disagreed with the Marshall Plan and some people who did agree with it. But there were some people who disagreed with the Marshall Plan. They wanted Germany punished. They wanted to make sure that Germany, we want to treat Germany fair, but we don't want them to be too strong, because look what they did. Twice, they tried to start these wars, and devastation all around. And we want to make sure that doesn't happen again. And so some people were, not really wanting to do that. Other people were like, okay, you know what? Germany did all these things. They don't have any necessarily ill will, but we need to help America first, We got to keep America first, kind of thing. And so they didn't want the money spent overseas when they thought maybe it should be spent in the United States. And so I'm going to have you read a couple of these guys and what they're saying, but because I think it's interesting, and that's probably part of your discussion question. I don't know. But anyway, so that's where they're at. There is the Marshall Plan. So the Marshall Plan is going to rebuild Europe into what we have today, with a prosperous prosperous Western Europe, and Now, Eastern Europe is, having gotten rid of communism, uh, is still kind of starting to catch up, but they're several decades behind because we offered money to the Soviet Union actually for the Marshall Plan, and they turned us down. They did not want Western money. They Stalin wanted to do it himself, and so as a result, they lost several decades of development and recovery. You can still see in a lot of ways, Eastern Europe and Russia, you can still see the vestiges of World War II. And so, all right, so that's what I just want to say about that Marshall Plan. And until then, I guess I'll talk to you later.